They say Rafael De Luca hasn't stood up for anyone in 10 years, not for his closest allies, not for his deadliest enemies, and certainly not for the sake of mercy. In the shadows of this city, he is more than a man. He is a stone statue in a pinstriped suit, a king who rules from a throne of silence and ironclad discipline. To the world, Raphael is untouchable, unmovable, and utterly hollow. But on a Tuesday afternoon that felt like any other, the silence of his estate was shattered by a sound that shouldn't exist in his world. The frantic, uneven heartbeat of a child running for her life. Mila Vanzetti, a 5-year-old girl in a torn pink silk dress, sprinted past 2 armed guards who were too stunned to lift their weapons. She didn't stop until she collapsed at the boss's feet, her blonde hair matted with sweat and her face stained with the kind of tears that change a person forever. She didn't beg for her life. She didn't ask for money. Instead, she reached out, clutched his hand with her trembling fingers, and whispered 5 words that made the most dangerous man in Italy drop his glass of amber liquor and stand up for the first time in a decade. Stick around until the very end, because the choice Raphael is about to make in that sun-drenched courtyard will send shockwaves through the underworld. You think you know what happens when a boss is faced with a crisis, but you have no idea how one little girl's secret is about to dismantle an empire. Before we reveal the hidden debt behind Mila Vanzetti's tears, make sure to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Now let's dive in. The sun was heavy over the De Luca estate, the kind of heat that makes everything feel slow, even the breathing of the men in black suits. Raphael sat in his woven raffia chair, the smoke from his cigar curling like a snake in the air. Across from him, Nico and Paolo stood like pillars of salt, eyes hidden behind dark glass, hands never moving far from their belts. This was a private meeting, a silent one, until the sound of gravel crunching broke the peace. It wasn't a car, it wasn't a rival's footstep, it was the frantic, uneven rhythm of a child running. Mila Vanzetti burst into the courtyard, her blonde hair caught in the wind, her pink gown stained with the dust of the road. Nico moved instinctively, his hand twitching toward his jacket, his face a mask of professional coldness. But then he stopped. Raphael didn't move, at least not at first. He watched the girl through narrowed eyes. She looked like a ghost from a world he had long ago forgotten. She didn't look at the guards. She didn't look at the guns. She looked straight at the man in the fedora. "They said you were the only one who doesn't have to follow the rules," she gasped, her voice breaking between sobs. Raphael felt a strange, cold prickle at the back of his neck. He set his amber liquor down with a steady hand, but inside, the silence of his world was beginning to crack. Why would a child think a man like him followed no rules, when his entire life was a prison of them? Mila didn't wait for permission. She collapsed at Raphael's knees, her small hands clutching the expensive fabric of his pinstriped trousers. Paolo stepped forward to pull her away, but Raphael raised a single, tattooed finger. Total silence. Even the birds in the lemon trees seemed to stop. Raphael leaned down. The scent of gunpowder and expensive cologne met the scent of strawberry shampoo and salt. He saw the raw desperation in her eyes, the kind of look a man usually only sees when he's holding someone over a ledge. But this was a child. "Mila," he said, his voice a low, gravelly hum, "you shouldn't be here, your father. He chose a different path. We don't speak." She shook her head, her tears splashing onto his polished shoes. She leaned in, her voice a tiny thread of sound that reached only his ears. "They said you signed it." Raphael froze. His mind raced through 1,000 ledgers, 1,000 contracts, the Vanzetti estate, the urban renewal project. He had signed a paper 3 months ago that finalized the foreclosure of her home. To him, it was a numbers game. To her, it was the end of the world. How do you explain to a child that you are the monster in her story? Nico and Paolo exchanged a glance. They could see the shift in their boss. It wasn't anger, it was something much more dangerous. It was a realization. Raphael looked at the girl, then at the two men who represented his power. He thought about the men waiting for him in the boardrooms, men with clean hands and filthy hearts who were using his name to put a 5-year-old on the street. He had spent his life building a reputation for being untouchable, but as Mila looked up at him, waiting for the man who didn't follow rules to save her, Raphael realized he had been the biggest follower of all. He followed the money. He followed the family. Slowly, deliberately, Raphael DeLuca stood up. He didn't just stand, he towered. He adjusted his fedora, the shadow hiding his eyes. He didn't look at Mila, he looked at Nico. "Nico," Raphael said, his voice cutting through the heat like a blade, "get the car and call the council. Tell them the Vanzetti contract is being reevaluated." Paolo's jaw tightened. "Boss, that contract is with the mayor's office and the underbosses. You can't just tear it up. It'll look like—" "Like what, Paolo?" Raphael asked, stepping closer. "Like I've grown a heart, or like I've finally decided to see who's actually holding the pen." Raphael was about to walk into a room where bullets couldn't help him, and for the first time in his life, he was terrified of what he might find. The drive from the estate to the city center was usually a silent affair, but today the silence felt heavy, like the air before a massive storm breaks. Raphael sat in the back of the armored sedan, his eyes fixed on the passing scenery, but his mind was miles away. Beside him, Mila had finally stopped crying, her small frame dwarfed by the leather seat. She was clutching a small, frayed teddy bear she'd pulled from a hidden pocket in her dress, a tiny piece of home she was fighting to keep. Nico Ferrante watched his boss through the rearview mirror. He had served the DeLuca family for 15 years, and he knew every twitch of Raphael's jaw, every subtle shift in his posture. What he saw now worried him. Raphael wasn't just planning a business move, he was reassessing his soul. "Boss," Nico said, his voice low so Mila wouldn't hear. "The council is already gathered at the palazzo. They were expecting the final signatures on the Vanzetti foreclosure. If you walk in there and tell them you're pulling back, it won't just be a disagreement. It'll be seen as a breach of the blood oath." Raphael didn't look away from the window. The blood oath was designed to protect the family, Nico, not to turn us into common vultures picking at the bones of little girls. My father used to say that a man who doesn't know the difference between a business rival and a victim is a man who has already lost his crown. "But the mayor's office," Nico pushed, his tone cautious. "They've already allocated the funds for the redevelopment. The city's elite are counting on that land. If you stop this, you're not just fighting our people, you're fighting the law." Raphael finally turned his head. His eyes were cold, but there was a spark of something ancient in them. "The law is just a story told by the people who win, Nico. Today, I'm changing the ending." As the car pulled up to the imposing gates of the palazzo, Mila reached out and touched Raphael's sleeve. Her hand was so small against his dark suit. "Are they the bad men?" she whispered. Raphael looked at her, and for a fleeting second the mask of the Mafia boss slipped. He saw himself in her, a child who had been forced to grow up too fast in a world where shadows were longer than the light. He leaned over and adjusted the small bow in her hair with a gentleness that would have shocked his enemies. "In this building, Mila, everyone thinks they are the hero," he said softly. "But you stay close to Paolo. Don't let go of his hand. I have to go speak to some old friends who have forgotten what it means to be a man." The doors opened. The paparazzi and the city's hangers-on were gathered, expecting a victory lap for the DeLuca empire. Instead, they saw a man stepping out with a grim determination, followed by a child who represented the very thing he was supposed to destroy. The cameras flashed, capturing the image of the King of Silence, looking like a protector rather than a predator. The tension was a living thing now, crawling up the marble steps of the palazzo. Raphael knew that once he crossed this threshold, there was no going back. He was about to trade his peace for a war of reputation, and the cost was yet to be determined. The conference room was a cathedral of glass and mahogany, smelling of expensive tobacco and old secrets. Seated around the table were the four heads of the city's most influential circles, men who didn't carry guns, but whose pens could erase a person from existence just as effectively. At the head of the table sat Don Lorenzo, a man who had mentored Raphael's father and who considered himself the architect of the city's current order. When Raphael walked in, the room didn't fall silent, it grew cold. The men watched him, their eyes moving from his face to the door, where Mila was being led away by Paolo to a waiting area. "Raphael," Lorenzo said, his voice like dry parchment. "You're late. We were just discussing the timeline for the Vanzetti auction. The city is ready to move. The papers are in front of you. Just a signature and we can all go to dinner." Raphael didn't sit. He walked to the window, looking out at the city he supposedly ruled. "I've been looking at the Vanzetti files again, Lorenzo, specifically the debt structure. It's creative. Interest rates that double every month, clauses that trigger foreclosure if a single payment is 12 hours late. This isn't business. It's a trap." A man named Morty, a banker who handled the family's laundering, let out a short, sharp laugh. "It's a legal trap, Raphael. That's the beauty of it. Vanzetti's father was a fool who gambled with his legacy. We're just the ones collecting the debt. Why the sudden interest in the fine print?" Raphael turned slowly, leaning his hands on the glass table. The tattoos on his knuckles, symbols of a life spent in the dirt, caught the light. "Because the debt is being paid for by a 5-year-old girl who has nowhere to go. Because my name is on those papers, and I don't like my name being used to bully children." The room went deathly quiet. Lorenzo leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Careful, boy. You are speaking about a deal that involves the city's infrastructure. Your reputation is built on your reliability. If you start making decisions based on what? Sympathy? Guilt? Then you are the man we thought you were. You're a liability." "I'm the man who signs your checks, Morty," Raphael said, ignoring Lorenzo for a moment. "And I'm the man who ensures your bank stays standing. If I say the Vanzetti contract is predatory, it is predatory. I'm not asking for a debate. I'm informing you that the foreclosure is canceled. I will personally buy out the debt at its original value." "At its original value," Morty gasped. "That's millions in lost interest. The council won't stand for that. You're taking money out of their pockets for a whim." Raphael pulled a silver pen from his pocket, but he didn't sign the paper. Instead, he drew a single, thick line through the signature block. "Then tell the council they can come and take it from my pocket, but tell them to bring more than their accountants." He stood straight, the weight of his decision settling onto his shoulders like lead. He could feel the eyes of the room burning into him. He had just declared war on his own bottom line, and in this world, that was the only sin that was never forgiven. As Raphael exited the room, the atmosphere in the hallway had shifted. The secretaries and junior associates avoided his gaze, their heads bowed as they whispered into their phones. Word traveled fast in this building. The king of silence had just defied the old guard, and the sharks were already sensing blood in the water. He found Mila sitting on a velvet bench, her legs swinging back and forth. Paolo stood nearby, looking like a man who was expecting a physical fight at any moment. When Mila saw Raphael, her face lit up with a fragile hope that made his chest ache. "Did you fix it?" she asked, her voice echoing in the marble hall. "I'm working on it, Mila," Raphael replied, his voice softer than he ever intended it to be in public. "But the people inside, they don't like it when things change. We have to go." As they walked toward the elevator, a side door opened and a woman stepped out. It was Elena, the daughter of Don Lorenzo, and a woman who had once been close to Raphael before the business of their families had driven a wedge between them. She looked at Mila, then at Raphael, her expression a mix of pity and warning. "Raphael, stop," she said, catching his arm. "Do you have any idea what my father is doing right now? He's calling the regional heads. He's telling them you've lost your mind. He's saying you're putting the family's future at risk for a piece of sentimentality. Raphael stopped, looking down at her hand on his sleeve. Sentimentality is a word people use when they're afraid of the truth, Elena. Your father is angry because I'm proving that he doesn't own me. He thinks he can manage my soul like a ledger. He's wrong. It's not just about the money. And you know it, Elena hissed, her voice a desperate whisper. It's about the hierarchy. If you can change the rules for one girl, everyone will think they can come to you for a miracle. You'll be flooded with the desperate and the weak. You'll stop being a boss and start being a martyr. And martyrs don't last long in this city. Raphael leaned in close, his voice a low, dangerous vibration. Maybe the city needs a few more martyrs and a few fewer vultures. Tell your father that if he wants to challenge my leadership, he should do it to my face, not behind a telephone. He stepped into the elevator, pulling Mila in with him. As the doors closed, he saw Elena's face, a mask of genuine fear. She knew what was coming. The old guard didn't just disagree, they erased. They were going to try to prove that Raphael was weak, and they would use the very child he was trying to save as the lever to break him. Inside the small space of the elevator, Mila looked up at him. Why is that lady sad? Raphael looked at the golden numbers counting down. Because she knows that doing the right thing usually comes with a very high price, little one, and she's wondering if I can afford to pay it. The elevator hit the ground floor, and as the doors opened, a wall of reporters and flashing lights greeted them. The story was out. The Mafia boss and the little girl. The headline was already writing itself, and it wasn't the kind of publicity Raphael's world could survive. The walk to the car was a gauntlet. Mr. DeLuca, are you adopting the Vanzetti girl? Is this a PR stunt to cover the recent investigations? What does the council think of your refusal to sign? The questions pelted him like stones. Raphael kept his arm around Mila's shoulders, his face a mask of iron, while Nico and Paolo cleared a path through the throng of journalists. Once inside the car, the silence was a relief, but it was short-lived. Raphael's phone began to vibrate incessantly. Messages from capos he hadn't spoken to in years, threats disguised as advice, requests for urgent meetings. The entire structure of his organization was shaking. Boss, we need to go to the safe house, Nico said, his eyes scanning the traffic. The estate is too exposed right now. If Lorenzo wants to make a point, he'll do it somewhere public, but not somewhere he can be traced. We need to go off the grid until we can count our allies. Raphael looked at Mila, who was staring out the window at the flashing lights of the city. She didn't understand the politics, but she felt the vibration of the danger. No, Raphael said firmly. We go back to the estate. If I hide now, I'm admitting that I'm afraid of them. I'm the head of the DeLuca family. I don't run from my own people. But the child, Paolo started. The child stays with me, Raphael interrupted. If I send her away, she's a target. If she's with me, they have to go through me to get to her. And they know I'm still the best shot in this city, even if they think I've gone soft. The car swerved through the city streets, heading back toward the quiet outskirts. Raphael began making his own calls. He needed to find the one man who still remembered what honor looked like, the retired underboss, a man named Silas, who lived in a secluded villa on the coast. Silas was the only one with enough weight to balance the council's scales. But as the call went to voicemail for the third time, a cold realization settled in Raphael's gut. Silas wasn't picking up. Either he was already dead or he had already picked a side. He looked at his hands, the tattoos, the scars, the heavy gold ring. He had spent his whole life building a fortress of fear, thinking it would keep him safe. But now, as he tried to do one single decent thing, he realized that fear was a double-edged sword. It didn't buy loyalty, it only bought silence. And silence was useless when you needed a voice to stand with you. Mila, he said, his voice barely a whisper, do you trust me? She turned her head, her blue eyes wide and honest. You stood up, she said simply. My daddy said only the good ones stand up. Raphael felt a pang of shame so sharp it almost brought him to his knees. He wasn't one of the good ones. He was just a man who had finally reached his limit for being a bad one. The De Luca estate looked the same as they pulled in, but the air was different. The guards at the gate didn't look Raphael in the eye. They performed their duties with a mechanical precision that felt hollow. It was the look of men who were waiting for a new commander. Raphael led Mila into the house, directing the housekeeper to get her some food and a room. He then retreated to his study, a room filled with books he never read and weapons he hoped he'd never have to use again. Nico and Paolo followed, closing the heavy oak doors behind them. "We're being isolated," Nico said, packing the room. "I just got word from the docks. The men there, they're refusing to take orders from me. They say they're waiting for clarification from Don Lorenzo. This is a coup in everything but name, Raphael." Raphael sat at his desk, staring at the empty glass of liquor from earlier. "They think they can starve me out. They'll cut off the cash flow, shut down the shipping lanes, and wait for my own men to turn on me for their paychecks. It's a classic move. Lorenzo taught it to me himself." "So what do we do?" Paolo asked. "We can't just sit here and wait for them to decide our fate. We have to strike first." "No," Raphael said, his voice cold. "That's what they want. They want me to start a shootout. They want to be able to say that I'm unstable, that I've become a danger to the city. Then they can kill me and call it cleaning house. No, we don't use guns, not yet." He opened his laptop, his fingers flying across the keys. He began accessing accounts that weren't tied to the family name, private reserves he'd built up over years for a day he hoped would never come. "If they want to play with the city's economy, we'll play. I'm going to flood the market with the Vanzetti debt. I'm going to make it public. I'm going to show the world exactly how the city's elite plan to build their new paradise." "You're going to leak the documents," Nico gasped. "That'll destroy the mayor, it'll destroy the council, it'll destroy us." "It'll destroy the version of us that preys on children," Raphael said, his eyes glowing with a dark fire. "I'm okay with that. If the empire has to burn to save that girl's home, then let it burn. I'll be the king of the ashes." Suddenly, the lights in the study flickered and died. The hum of the air conditioning cut out, leaving the room in a heavy, stifling darkness. Outside, the sound of a heavy vehicle approaching the gates echoed through the night. Raphael stood up, reaching into his desk drawer and pulling out a heavy black pistol, not because he wanted to use it, but because the time for talking was officially over. The darkness of the estate was absolute, broken only by the moonlight filtering through the high windows. Raphael stood in the center of the study, his breathing slow and rhythmic. Beside him, Nico and Paolo had their weapons drawn, their bodies tensed for the impact they knew was coming. A loud crash echoed from the front of the house, the sound of the heavy iron gates being forced open. No sirens, no shouts, just the methodical approach of men who knew they had the upper hand. "They're here," Paolo whispered. Raphael didn't move. "Stay here, protect the girl, I'm going to meet them." "Boss, that's suicide," Nico argued. "They won't let you talk." "They have to," Raphael said, his voice a low, terrifying growl. "Because I'm still the man who knows where all the bodies are buried, literally and figuratively. If they kill me without a word, the documents I just sent go live in 10 minutes. Every news outlet in the country gets a copy of the council's dirty laundry." He walked out of the study and down the grand staircase, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He reached the front doors and pushed them open, stepping out into the cool night air. A fleet of black SUVs stood in a semicircle around the entrance. Men in tactical gear stood behind the open doors, their rifles leveled at him. In the center of the circle stood Don Lorenzo, looking small and fragile in the moonlight, yet radiating a poisonous power. "Raphael," Lorenzo said, his voice carrying easily in the still air, "you've made a very expensive mistake. The girl is not worth the kingdom. Give her to us, sign the papers, and maybe, we let you live in exile." Raphael stood on the top step, his silhouette a perfect target. He didn't raise his gun. He just looked at the old man who had been like a grandfather to him. "The kingdom is already gone, Lorenzo," Raphael said, his voice steady. "The moment you decided that a child's life was a line item on a balance sheet, you lost. You think these men are here for you. They're here for the winner. And right now, they're wondering why a man of your age is so afraid of a man holding nothing but the truth." A red laser dot appeared on Raphael's chest, dancing over his heart. He didn't flinch. 10 minutes, Lorenzo," Raphael said, checking his watch. 10 minutes until the world knows everything, including the offshore accounts you've been hiding from the council. What do you think they'll do to you when they find out you've been skimming from their pockets?" The silence that followed was the heaviest of all. Lorenzo's face twisted in a mask of pure rage. The men around him shifted, their eyes moving between the two leaders. The balance of power was teetering on a knife's edge. Inside the house, Mila stood at the top of the stairs, watching the man who had stood up for her. She didn't know that his life was seconds away from ending. She only knew that for the first time in her life, she felt safe. Watch out for Part 2.